So, Draining Love Story is my favorite Sewerslvt album. In my opinion, it's the most consistent album with no real low points. It maintains its intensity throughout the long runtime, and the arrangements and the sound design are just great in my opinion. Even though I'm kinda indifferent and don't really like super long tracks, the formula here, for what it was going for, worked near perfectly. Among my favorite tracks there are Yandere Complex and Lexapro Delirium. So when I saw that the successor project Cynthoni remade a couple of those songs, I was somewhat intrigued. Now, I've listened to the first 3 Cynthoni EPs, and my reactions ranged from excitement to lukewarm at best. The calmer, more ambient tones of Cynthoni didn't really resonate with me that much on the first 2 EPs. I was still expecting something raw, but also sonically different from Sewerslvt. I did come around a bit more to the first 2 EPs though. It wasn't by that much to where I'd give them anything over a 7 out of 10 though. I liked it enough to buy a vinyl copy on sale, albeit more as a collector's item from an artist I respect than an album I personally adore. After listening to Smoke It to the Butt, I feel it was a promising compromise between the original Sewerslvt sound and the ambient Cynthoni sound. It was consistently interesting, but the album was just mainly house cuts. I wanted to see how a full-length project would turn out with just a little bit more variety. Could they genuinely pull off a great project front to back with this new sound? And now, here we are. I wanted Cynthoni to drop an original solo project, but I guess a remake of Draining Love Story is fine too. Like, to be honest for a sec, I kinda feel like I'm milking this subject, and I really wouldn't have talked about this unless if people weren't reminding me that this dropped. It's mostly because I didn't have too many expectations for this project. Like, at the bare minimum, I expected this to be an interesting alternative to the original. So, how are the actual songs? The album starts off with the ambient track It's Happening Again. Whereas the intro to the other EPs are lighter, the ambience here is already a lot heavier and just more dense. It's similar in structure but sounds like way different from the original album's opener, Love Is a Mighty Big Word. It goes from purely ambient into a more distorted drop. As an intro, I feel it's a lot stronger than the other Cynthoni openings. I think the first proper track is Lust Love, which is a remake of New Love, which notably isn't part of the original album. I actually thought this was a completely original track, which got me kinda hyped. But either way, I think it's very strong. I remember listening to this for the first time and getting super hyped for the drop, and that's still a high point for me. This is a good mix between the ambience and the rawness, but it tilts slightly more into the raw, which I personally enjoy. It's 6 minutes long, but it definitely doesn't feel that way. Compared to the original, this is just a solid improvement on an already great track. After that, I feel we get into the first proper remake with Yandere Era. Now, Yandere Complex is my favorite track on the original, and with the previous track to go off of, I had high hopes. I tried to compare it to the original, but it sounds almost nothing like it. Not that it's a bad thing, it's still pretty great. I think the drum pattern is similar and the key is maybe the same, but other than that, this is a uniquely Cynthoni track. It's definitely leaning more into the Yandere concept with the random screams put throughout, which I'd say is more tasteful than fetishizing an actual murderer, but let's not get into that too much. I kinda miss the random rapping the original has and the twinkly synths there, but I'd say in this case, the ambience added with the Cynthoni filter is a worthy replacement. Overall, the song definitely stands on its own. Great track. Next, we take a swan dive into eternity. Here I feel this is the album's equivalent to Evercast. In my opinion, both songs are good, but don't do anything super noteworthy. They're a vibe, and that's fine. The track here doesn't do too much besides the usual filters, drops, and drum pattern change. It's just straight pads and some cool arpeggios. This is absolutely someone's favorite track, and they're probably grilling me about not noticing the subtle differences between this track and the older album's equivalent. But honestly, the song is cool. It's produced well, and I think there's just better Cynthoni Sewerslvt songs. Moving on from that, I don't really know how to feel about this one. This is Lexapro Doesn't Work, the remake of Lexapro Delirium. Maybe this is my bias for the original kicking in since I don't really like this rendition that much. It really leans more into the ambient tones, giving a version of this song that's softer and more filtered. Of course, there are a lot more synth layers here, which gives it its own identity, kinda. And the vocal chops are still on point. However, I feel the balance between the raw and the ambience could have been done better. More noticeable changes in the arrangement would have also been welcome. All things considered, I still think this is a good track, but it's not peak like the original in my opinion. I don't know if this is a hot take, but I feel this is kind of a downgrade. Alright, next track. The Feeling Is Gone. I'd say that's aptly named, but I love the intro here and just the ambient side design in general. But a majority of this track is mostly ambience. When we do get to the breaks, it's only for a few minutes. I'll admit, it does sound good, but nothing else really happens here. The Draining Love Story equivalent to this would be This Fleeting Feeling. There is a monologue in both tracks, which is a key part of each. In the original, it feels kinda like sad set dressing, but it matches the aesthetic, so whatever. But this time it feels a lot more intentional. Even if it's just a sample, it sounds like the Cynthoni persona reflecting on the Sewerslvt persona and how the past works and experiences affect the new music. However, it says that the newer self has to cling on to the older self. I have opinions on that statement, but I'll share them later. And honestly, I'd say this track is better than the original. I didn't think you could improve much on a track like this, but bravo, Cynthoni. This is the moment where... okay.
This track is called... Oh! Wait!
Okay, we are fucking back. After the kinda lows of the last two tracks, this super hard-hitting drum and bass track just hits all the right places for me. Like, I can't even tell if I'm listening to Cynthoni anymore. This straight up just feels like a new Sewerslvt track. The Cynthoni ambience is still there, but the rawness is definitely a lot more pronounced here. The synths sound especially sharp, while also maintaining the big feeling they have on the other tracks. The song doesn't deviate too much throughout, other than a drum break change halfway through, but either way, it doesn't go longer than it should, so it's not a big issue. The track that this kind of replaces is Swing in His Cell. I do think Sewerslvt is a much better track, but it's not a Coughing Baby versus Hydrogen Bomb style matchup, worthy replacement nonetheless. And now we have the remake of the most popular Sewerslvt track, Mr. Kill Myself. It's pretty good. If you listen to the Cynthoni version and the original back-to-back, you can probably tell there aren't too many differences here. The biggest change here are pretty much the universal changes a lot of the remakes have on this album. More synths, wider ambience, you know the drill. But everything here is a lot punchier compared to the original, which I appreciate. There are also a lot of other smaller details here, like the new breaks and the longer interludes that just serve to be interesting differences than anything super intriguing. I'll also commend the song for not feeling like 9 minutes. It does the changes frequently enough to where I don't tune out until the next change. In my opinion, Cynthoni of Flames improves on the original Mr. Kill Myself. Enough to where it's significant, but not enough to where I like it much more than the original. It's still a great track though, I'm just not a super fan of either. Now, I can say a number of the same things about the remake to Down the Drain. It has the new Cynthoni coat of paint the other remakes do, and here it works to the song's benefit. For the first half, it's a marginal improvement over the original. But the change that bumps it up for me is the switch from drum and bass to hardstyle at the halfway point. I wish there were crazier changes like this in the other remakes, but I'll take what I can get. Once again, this is just a straight improvement over the original. The final track, Slow Burn, is a remake of Slow Death, and yeah, it doesn't really change much from the original. The drums are punchier, and also speeds up at the end to just barely be a drum and bass track. Overall, it's good, just slight improvements. After tallying the average of the scores I gave this album, I would give it a 7.8 out of 10. Mind you, I think the original DLS is an 8 out of 10, even though it's my favorite Sewerslvt project. Overall, I enjoy most of the changes that Cynthoni brings to most of the tracks. The changes that do matter hit hard, but I can't really ignore the instances where the Cynthoni filters don't really improve much or kinda hampered the tracks. The quote-unquote original songs here are also a highlight here. I don't know the Sewerslvt catalog from front to back off the top of my head, so I don't know if all the songs here are actually remakes, but Yandere Era and Sewerslvt are my favorites on the album. But the reason I liked Sewerslvt is because it had the same rawness that any other Sewerslvt song would have had. If the original Draining Love Story didn't exist, this would be by far the best Cynthoni album. But with the sentiments echoed in the track The Feeling Is Gone, I feel the one thing holding back Cynthoni as a musical project is the reliance on deliberately invoking Sewerslvt, to the point of sometimes using it as a crutch. I say this mostly pertaining to aesthetics, but also musically somewhat. This album for the most part shows that they found a good compromise between the ambient and raw sounds and made something, distinct. Even if this fusion is interesting, Cynthoni is willingly still chained to the Sewerslvt legacy. The projects are still listed as Cynthoni and Sewerslvt, which I don't even think that's fully necessary anymore. This is its own unique thing. Not this album, I mean, but the entire musical project. I feel there isn't a universe where this album replaces the original. I really want to say this project stands well on its own, but I can't say so because of the nature of this being a remake. Of course, that's my interpretation of the interludes track, and I could honestly be way off. I realize this is just my view on how I feel the project should proceed, but hey, I'm not Cynthoni, they can do whatever they want. But if anything, this makes me excited somewhat to what could potentially come next. If it wasn't obvious, I think this album is good, but the energy put into this could have been directed elsewhere. I'll stop talking now.